Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to another session with us here on YouTube. And today I have something special for you. I grew up in the 60s, and I grew up during the civil rights movement, during a time in which Dr. King and all of those who were fighting for the rights of people that were being marginalized all across the country here in the United States. And even though Dr. King was certainly influenced by Mahatma Gandhi, a lot of his influence came from sociologists. And I know this will probably come as news to some of you, but Dr. King also received his BA in sociology, and his entire civil rights movement, his pastoral conversations, his religious ideology, all stemmed from his relationship at Morehouse College with his sociology professors, the influence of the academic sociology culture. He was very highly influenced by this academic subject. He felt that sociology was the answer to the corrections that needed to be made in order to have a more balanced society in which men were not judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And he knew the content of their character was socially constructed through socialization. And so he fought very hard to change systems and the way that society was set up, and the way that society was so marginalized that it actually caused gaps, racial gaps. And so even though he developed a nonviolent perspective, his nonviolence was not limited to just violence per se, but Dr. King knew that there was so much more that was needed within the social constructs of society to help change the racial tension that was resulting from a lot of the Jim Crow laws, from slavery, from segregation, that he felt it was very important for him to develop a sociological imagination. And I'm going to read something to you which I think is very relevant today, because although Dr. King did not develop per se sociological concepts or had theories, and he's never even included in when we talk about classical sociologists, he's not included because most of the time when we talk about sociologists, we're basically talking about those who have PhDs or who may have taught in universities, who have bodies of work that is still used today in the theory and concepts of sociology, the perspectives. And so Dr. King, he was very religious minded, not necessarily because that is he had a concept of religion being the answer to society's woes, but it was because it was a family tradition. His dad was a pastor. So he used religion as a method or as a means to an end for getting across his point of civil rights. And so during that time, Dr. King's time, a lot of your prominent religious leaders were sociologists. And many people don't understand how important sociology is to concepts of consciousness and the mind and the body, the spirit and the soul, the emotions, and how much sociology impacts that. There is a topic in sociology called the Sociology of Emotions. And so we know that oftentimes sociology gets a bad rap from the perspective that, you don't speak about it. Most people, you have never heard anyone talk about Dr. King being a sociologist from any perspective. James Baldwin, W.E.B. Du Bois, none of these people were considered or even are considered in the academic field of sociology. Their work is perhaps mentioned, just like in my sociology textbooks. When we talk about Dr. King, we're always talking about him from a race perspective, or from a civil rights perspective, or from a social movement perspective. And very rarely do we talk about him as a sociologist and how he functioned in his civil rights movement as a socially conscious leader. And so I want to read something to you. So please don't get discombobulated if my head is down, but I think this is very important to understanding Dr. King and how he was so highly influenced by sociology. As a matter of fact, I wanted to share that Dr. King spoke at the American Sociological Association in 1968. And he was 38 years old in 1967. In September 1967, Dr. King was only 38 years old, but already president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and winner of a Nobel Peace Prize when he took the podium at APA's annual convention in Washington, D.C. And what people don't understand is he spoke sociologically when he went to the American Sociological Association, and he showed his ability to associate the movement of the civil rights times with sociology. And he realized, and he laid a heavy burden on the shoulders of the social scientists and sociologists of his time. And he was very adamant about how important they are to the change that was necessary in society. And that excited me. So let me read you just a little history of Dr. King's relationship with sociology and how he became affiliated with this field. And Dr. Martin Luther King was not only an internationally renowned civil rights leader, but was also a public sociologist par excellence. King was born into a family and local community of socially involved ministers, deeply dedicated to issues of racial justice in Atlanta, Georgia. His father was pastor of the Ebenezer Baptist Church, located in the now famous Auburn Avenue Black community in Atlanta, who, along with peers such as the Reverend William Borders, pastor of the Wheat Street Baptist Church, and John Dobbs, informally called the Mayor of Sweet Auburn. He created a community culture that was highly critical of the racial status quo. It was in Auburn Avenue community that Dr. King developed his lifelong commitment to social justice that will become refined as he was educated and went through the experiences of being a leader of a powerful social movement. Now, you have to remember, social movements are part of the concepts in sociology. This is important to keep in mind, since often, while analyzing the contributions of King, it has been common to forget, or to undervalue the influence of his community of origin. It was here that he was exposed at an early age to highly educated Black men who took bold public stances against the racial oppression of their day. His time at Morehouse College as an undergraduate, 1944 to 1948, coincided with the most influential years of Benjamin E. Mays, the institution's president, who is a practical theologian and public sociologist who published what was considered to be, for many years, the seminal text of the sociology of the Black church. Mays, who was appointed as Morehouse president in the early 1940s, transformed his remarkable liberal arts college for Black men into a sociological learning community, teaching social justice and egalitarian values which permeated the culture of the campus and were reinforced by Mays' mandatory Tuesday chapel talks to Morehouse men. This is very exciting. Besides the leadership of Mays, the ideas and insights of Walter Shivers, the longtime chair of the Morehouse Department of Sociology, in which he majored, had a profound influence on Dr. King. Shivers was the chief Black community researcher for Arthur Raper's 1933, The Tragedy of Lynching, one of public sociological activist research in the South. From the 1940s until the late 1960s, when he retired, Shivers directed the Morehouse Family Institute, which sponsored annual conferences designed to translate academic knowledge about family issues for Black community members who will be invited to these campus events. Shivers' approach would have a profound influence on how Dr. King subsequently valued the capacity of sociology as a discipline to bring about social transformation. This is exciting. King would learn as well the importance of careful empirical sociological research from spending a summer working as a research assistant for the Afro-Caribbean Quaker sociologist Ira D. A. Reed, who was an Atlanta University Center faculty for a brief time. It should be mentioned that the reflective sociological reasoning typical of the culture of Morehouse College also involved the Department of Religion, which included professors such as S.M. Williams, who encouraged Morehouse students not only to study religious ideas, but also to be active in addressing questions of social inequality in a Jim Crow society. King's profound ethical and sociological critiques of race in American society, such as the letter from Birmingham jail and his I Have a Dream speech, were shaped by an older Morehouse professor, Howard Thurman, who was a theologian and with a strong sociological imagination, as best seen in his book, Jesus and the Disinherited, 1949. While Thurman was dean of Boston University's Marsh Chapel, he would introduce King, then a doctoral student, to the ideas of Gandhi. Thus, whenever King turned in the Morehouse curriculum, there was the emphasis of thinking sociologically to promote the public good of racial justice. Surviving papers from King's Morehouse and Crozier Seminary days reveal a young man with a keen sociological approach to theology and community justice issues. This pattern would continue in his sermons, which also intended to have a deep, reflective sociological focus. That King identified himself as a sociologist can be seen in his willingness to write prefaces to sociological texts such as Daniel Thompson's 1963 Classical Study of the Black Leadership Class. He also wrote at least one essay on the use of the behavioral sciences in efforts to transform communities and societies. King's first book, Stride Towards Freedom, 1958, was a personal ethnographic account of the origins and development of the 1955 Montgomery bus boycott, which is still a seminal handbook on how to organize a local social movement. Everybody knows in sociology, one of the topics we talk about very highly is social movement. It also includes one of the first sociological discussions about nonviolence as a means to achieve what would be eventually called restorative justice. Lastly, when King went to Stockholm in 1964, one of the people he most wanted to see was Gunnar Myrdal. Gunnar is Gunnarmyrdal, the Swedish economist whose monumental and American Dilemma 1944 had greatly influenced his views on race as a social and moral problem in the U.S. Now, y'all remember we talked about having a sociological imagination, taking your personal individual problem and associating it with the larger society in which you live, and therefore getting an understanding why you have the problem is because the problem is prevalent in the larger society. So let's keep reading. King's leadership of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference during the 1960s, like his command over the Montgomery bus boycott during the mid-1950s, demonstrated his skills as an applied public sociologist. His capacity to manage men and women with strong personalities and his extraordinary ability to delegate authority as a self-effacing leader was amazing. He was also a master of the media during an age in which television was beginning to become the dominant force in mass communication. If it were not for King's skill at dealing with the media, as well as his political acumen, his movement would not have been nearly as effective as it was. And everybody knows the media is one of the major agents of socialization. When King was assassinated in Memphis in 1968, just a year after he spoke at the American Sociological Association, he was being increasingly criticized as his movement began to falter outside the South and due to his opposition to the Vietnam War. Also, as indicated in his 1964 Nobel Peace Prize lecture, he was beginning to turn, at least since the early 1960s, to economic questions, which made many traditional supporters of his movement, including those in the media, increasingly uncomfortable. That is to say, he began to inch closer to the perspectives of emerging Black power leaders who were advocating Black economic empowerment. King's ability to take academically challenging theological and sociological ideas and translate them effectively for mass appeal made him a most unusual example of what a public sociologist does and for whom. Nevertheless, the most distinctive dimension of King's sociology was his integration of spiritual and interfaith concerns into his social analysis of racial problems and other important issues during his time, such as poverty and war. His sermons, lectures, and books have fascinating illustrations of how his spiritual values are intertwined with his astute sociological analysis. In doing this, King's approach provides a model for those sociologists interested in the ethical and spiritual dimensions of human experiences, and an example for those theologians wishing to understand the sociological context of religious studies. Now, this was I enjoyed this very much, and this particular reading came from a website called sociology.iresearchnet.com. And I thought this was a very good reading on how Dr. King was associated with the field of sociology. And one of the things that I'm going to do is share with you very briefly, and this may be one or two teachings or discussions on Dr. King's challenge to the nation's social sciences. And so, like I said, he spoke at the American Sociological Association in 1967. He was only 38 years old. He has always been had a profound influence in my life. I remember when I was in high school, I participated in a writing contest, and I can't give you all the details of what it was for. That was a long time ago, mind you. Anyway, I participated in a writing contest where I had to write a paper, and I wrote on Dr. King, and I wrote on slavery, racism, the civil rights movement, and I won the contest. The problem was that the paper that I had written, I cannot find it. After it was submitted to the school and to the newspaper, I no longer had access to it. I don't even remember getting any type of memorabilia from the magazine or from the school or anything. So, however, ever since then, I have been highly influenced by social movements and people who stand out publicly against issues that are affecting minorities. And so I was very influenced by him. And during the time when this was written, when he was speaking at the American Sociological Association, remember we just read that there was some tension between those who the pre-Dr. King and the Dr. King many years prior, or year prior to his death. People were saying he was starting to change his ideology. He was starting to become more pro-African and like an a pro-African, pan-Africanist. But in reality, Dr. King, his influence, when you take sociology, you cannot get away from it. You will never be the same in your life again. And I know people say, what in the world is sociology? You will not know what sociology is until you take your first class. Every person that I've spoken to that have even just taken introduction to sociology were very influenced by it and found it to be a very profound subject. However, you have to have a certain type of mindset to go further into sociology, because sociology can sometimes mask itself as some type of theoretical concept that cannot really be analyzed by the average person. But the further you get into sociology, the more you understand how sociology is in every facet of your life, your society, the groups that you're a part of, the culture that you're a part of. It doesn't matter what your topic is, whether it's anthropology, geography, environmental sciences, anything that has to do with the relationship between individuals and the societies that they live in, sociologists will be found among them. And so you have social anthropologists, you have social psychologists, you have social economists, you have everything that has to do with the social relationship between a system, a particular thought system, a particular organic or mechanical system. Sociologist touches that. And that's why we deal with perspectives of the symbolic interactionists, the functionalists, and as well as the perspective of when we talk about conflict theory. So we're always looking at society and trying to determine how is society influencing the individuals that make up that society. Under what circumstances are those individuals being influenced? And when they're influenced, how do they portray, or how do they materialize the influence of society? You will know society by the people that are in it. You can look at a group of people, and if you are sociologically astute and having this proper sociological imagination, you can look at that group and make a determination of how that group has been influenced. And you can look at the individuals in that group, and you can pick out what is it about this group that is drawing these particular people to this group. The civil rights movement, the reason why it was so big and so prevalent, and it had so many prominent leaders, because the prominent leaders that were affected by it were either black, minorities, poor, socially conscious, sociologists, radical people. They had something in common. They wanted to see a change in society. They saw that society conflicted. The social system of society conflicted with its minority citizens. There was a conflict. There was a strain in the roles. There was a conflict in the roles that minorities had within the society in which they were living, being socialized and being expected to meet norms and values. And so it's very important to understand how many sociologists have effect affected American society and has gotten us to where we are today. And so in our next session, we're going to talk about Dr. King's speech to the American Sociological Association and how come this speech is being held in high regard as a very important speech to the civil rights movement and to Dr. King's relationship with sociology. And so as we stated, in September 1962, when Dr. King was only 38, and president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, he also was a winner of a Nobel Peace Prize. He had so many large accomplishments at such an early age. And I believe, I don't want to get off topic, but I also believe that we are born to perform, and we are born to perform a specific task. Dr. King was born for his time and for the task that he was assigned for his life. And for him to have these type of high achievements at age 38 says a lot about his life. When he had accomplished all of these, which got him a place on the podium at the American Psychological Association's annual convention in Washington, D.C. And a rereading of his powerful address today captures the urgent tone of the 60s as he cajoled the nation's social scientists to tell it like it is. In fact, to APA's membership, whom he addressed as concerned friends of goodwill, his plea for help in changing a society poisoned to its soul by racism seems now ever more poignant in light of the tragedy that struck only 7 months later. The words he spoke at that September 1 as the convention's invited distinguished address were reprinted in the Journal of Social Sciences, Volume 2, Number 1, 1968. While the speech was in galley proofs, the shocking and numbing news of his assassination was released. It's very, 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 very important to understand the influence of sociology in our society. And I want to thank you for being with me for another session. And hopefully the next session we will be able to share some of the social aspects of Dr. King's speech to American Psychological Association and how important it is to understand that he was just not influenced because he was a black man. He was just not influenced by the racial tension of his time. He was not just influenced by some spiritual thought system that he had, but he had an academic foundation in sociology that permeated his being and that ignited his emotional passion towards wanting to see change in a society that he specifically says was poisoned by racism. Thank you once again for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Please leave a comment. Please like and subscribe to our Facebook page, and hopefully the next time we will have a more in-depth understanding of Dr. King's own thoughts and his relationships to sociology and the social sciences, and his admonition of sociologists to please tell it like it is. And I want to reiterate that I feel that that's very important to restate that if you are a social scientist and if you are in any society today and you have any understanding of the importance of sociology and sociologists' research and work towards changing society, it is important. I admonish you, not just on racism, but on every issue, feminism, on class issues, on poverty, on the economy, on the media, on every aspect of society in which you live, to speak up and speak out. And as he said, tell it like it is. Don't be held back by the times. Don't be held back by what you see in the media. The media's purpose is to influence you, is to socialize you to think a certain way. You have to go beyond the media. You have to actually put on the sociological imagination cap, put it on your head, put it on tight, wear it as if it's freezing outside until you can apply that principle to the situations that you see with your own eyes. Don't be deceived by what you are fed, but look at your own relationship. Look within your demographic. Look within your culture, within your small group, and look at the problems that you see and begin to apply those problems to the larger society in which you live. And make sure that when you do this, you're using your sociological imagination. Don't take it personal. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.